President Hines gave his vision of his transformation to Prairie View A&M University. And it was unbelievable in terms of his vision and how he laid it out. And he looked at me, Mr. Bayless, will you build this housing? Yes, sir, we will. Chancellor Thompson, do I have your support? Absolutely. Merriman Morton jumped out of his chair before he even turned and said, yes, we'll finance the transaction.
Whether you're developing a new student housing community or acquiring an existing one, fast and reliable internet isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. But when it comes to serving college students, standard telco providers often fall short on both performance and support. Don't risk a frustrating experience for you and your residents. Choose Campus Technologies, a provider with nearly 25 years of expertise in delivering top-tier internet infrastructure and exceptional customer service for student housing nationwide. Beyond high-speed wired and wireless internet, Campus Technologies also offers managed IT services to keep your property management team running smoothly at their properties. Even if you're not currently in the market for a provider, you need to know the best practices for upgrading your property's internet infrastructure. Download their latest white paper today. You can find the link in the show notes or visit campustechnologies.com. Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. I'm your host, Wesley Deese, and I'm also the CEO of Student Housing Insight. If this is your first time interacting with us, we are a platform for off-campus student housing professionals to network, share ideas, as well as data. You can find more information about our platform at studenthousinginsight.com. We'll also put that website and anything else we refer to in this episode that's on the web. We'll put that on the show notes so you can grab it there as well. In addition to the podcast, we also host the industry's monthly webinar for the U.S. called ShopTalk. Each month, we provide legislative and policy updates that are impacting our industry. ShopTalk also provides a monthly overview of pre-leasing data on a national and a regional basis, and sometimes we also have a panel of operators who provide their on-the-ground observations of how pre-leasing is going. And we typically provide a topic of the month as well. So a lot of great information, and if you were involved with the operations of student housing in the U.S., you should be registered to receive our monthly invites. You can register to receive those as well as review prior ShopTalk webinars by going to shoptalk.info. Again, that's shoptalk.info, and we'll provide that link in the show notes as well. So this is a episode that's part of our profiles in the student housing industry, where I sit down with an industry veteran and talk about their career journey. And let me just tell you, this is a big one. When I started this podcast back in 2017, this was really the person at the top of my list that, I wanted to put a microphone in front of and, ask him what it was like building the largest student housing firm in the world, and how he took renting apartments to college students and turned it into an asset class. That person is Bill Bayless, the co-founder and former CEO of American Campus Communities, and now the founder and the CEO of Maslow's Campus Communities. I never worked at ACC or for ACC, but I've got a lot of great friends and colleagues who have over the years. Some who were there at the start with Bill. And Bill and I talk about some of those folks. So if you've been around the industry a lot or for a while, you'll notice some names that are deep in tradition with this industry. But being in this industry since I guess 1997, I've observed probably the past 25 years of Bill's career, and I've just been amazed, not only at the company he was able to build, but how he's formed this industry. And so I really wanted to get into the stories behind the story, if that makes sense. And we also dive into Bill's life as a kid growing up in West Virginia, and the integral role that his wife played in his success as well. I think my favorite part of this interview is Bill's vision for Maslow's. And let me just tell you, he has assembled an incredible team around him, and I can't wait to see what they achieve. If you haven't looked at the length of this video yet, I'm just going to tell you it's a long one. Bill gave me all the time I wanted, and no topic was off limits. So buckle in. I don't care how long you've been in the industry, you're going to learn something you didn't know about how this just incredible industry has evolved and the parts that Bill has played in it. But with that being said, here's my interview with Bill Bayless. Bill.
Wes, great to be with you.
It's been, I think I'm going into my 28th, maybe my 29th year of student housing. And this is the first time you and I have got to sit across from each other. I am honored to be here, and thank you so much for giving us some time.
Well, as am I. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and this has been way too long coming. Glad to be
Well, you've been busy.
A little bit.
And when you retired, I reached out and said, hey, let's do something. And last year you made an announcement. We'll get into that. And I kind of tapped you again and said, hey, let's do this. Here we are about a year later, and we're finally doing it.
Excited to kick it off with you.
Well, you made some big announcements. I want to get into that, but everybody knows who Bill Bayless is in this industry. So what I really kind of wanted to talk about, I know West Virginia, right?
Yeah.
I know you started out there.
My heart.
But I want to go back a little bit before that.
Sure.
Where did you grow up? I didn't know if it was in West Virginia or let's just start there.
I grew up in a little town, Wellsburg, West Virginia. Population probably 5,000, 5,200, right on the Ohio River, about 30 miles from Pittsburgh. There's an old Tom Cruise movie from his early days, All the Right Moves, about high school football, that was filmed in the town next to mine.
Okay.
And if you watch that movie, you'll get a feel for how I grew up. My dad was a steel worker. My grandfather was a steel worker. So very blue collar, very industrial.
Yeah.
Just a wonderful place to grow up, though. The 70s and 80s growing up, great music, hard work. And I actually worked in a paper factory.
Okay.
During college in the summers.
Was that your first job?
No, my first job was washing cars and cutting grass like so many folks,
yeah.
11 years old. And but once I turned 18 and was off to college, got a job and was trying to get into the steel mill, but those were real hard jobs to get.
Yeah.
So I ended up working summers in the paper factory, which that good hard work made me realize, need to get back to school every fall.
Well, and I don't know if the paper factories in West Virginia are like the ones in North Carolina, where I grew up, but there's a little bit of a stench to the paper factories.
We would take your finished product. So all those big rolls of paper that you would make would get shipped up. I worked for a company called Westvaco, West Virginia Company is what Westvaco stood for. Most famous for the Lee Iacocca's bailout deal with the government got signed in the Westvaco building in New York.
Okay.
But we made industrial bags. So Portland cement bags, Purina dog chow bags, all kind of neoprene bags. And so good hard work, loved it. But just I grew up in the most wonderful place. Went to Catholic school for the first 8 years of my life. I was this tall in seventh grade. Played center on the grade school basketball team. Surprise, surprise. And you can imagine, given what I just told you, we were 0-22 over 2 years. But I have to tell you, it was a wonderful experience for me because I learned how to lose with grace. and then kind of the flip of that is I went to a public high school. It was a big county public high school, about 475 my graduating class.
Okay.
And it was AAA, as big as you can get in West Virginia, and played football there. And my high school football coach, Paul Bud Billiard, God rest his soul, he died a couple years ago, along with my father, one of the greatest mentors of my life. We lost the state championship game my junior year, lost the quarterfinals senior year, but he was very inspirational for me. was a real motivator and created a culture of motivation. Candidly, a lot of my, I think, management and leadership styles really descended from having played for him in high school and kept in touch with him my whole life.
Isn't it amazing how high school sports has that kind of impact all throughout your life?
Totally.
Saying that, I remember, immediately going back to high school my senior year, we went undefeated, which was a big turnaround. Our high school had not won a championship since my father was in high school, at the same high school. And, it's one of those things, we still, now everybody's on Facebook and, I've got my, I guess it's my almost 30th.
Yeah.
That's coming up.
That one's come and gone for me.
People are posting up, the T-shirts that we had of being 12-0 and all this kind of stuff. But anyway,
that's awesome.
It's just, and same thing with my coach. He passed away not too long ago, and still remember a lot of
and especially
lessons.
Team sports.
Yeah.
And learning to collaborate and play a role. I didn't start obviously with my size in football, but was a special teamer and second teamer, and always gave it 110%.
Yeah.
And but one of my life's mottos, actually, I've said it too many times. My son got it tattooed on his arm. I'm fairly anti-tattoos, but when he came home with my life's motto on his arm, I'm like, it's kind of hard to protest that one. But was at practice one day, and one of the coaches, if it's to be, it's up to me.
Oh, wow.
And just putting in perspective, you control your own fate, you control your own destiny. It's what you put in. It's your own hard work that determines what happens and where you go. And so it's kind of always stuck with me and was always kind of my personal theme.
Wow. And now your son's got it tattooed on.
Yes.
That's awesome. So high school, were you always a mountaineer? I mean,
no. So I grew up 35 miles from Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And so I actually grew up a Pitt fan, which is the mortal enemy of West Virginia. Yeah. And they became my mortal enemy once I went to WVU. But I actually grew up a Pitt fan, the Tony Dorsett era, Hugh Green, some of their, All-American teams. When I went off to WVU, of course, immediately, Mountaineer at heart, Mountaineer, born and bred. And so became a diehard Mountaineer fan. Pitt immediately became the enemy, Pitt, Penn State, or bad words. And started at WVU, actually wanted to get into criminology.
Okay.
And my dream was to be in the Secret Service.
Okay.
And now 5'6", I always say, guarding the president's kneecaps was not, in my future. But I realized pretty quick that wasn't going to happen. And then spent a couple years in computer science, which I did really, really well, but I hated it. But I loved the logic part of it, but it was just sitting around and programming. So, and this was the old days, Fortran, PL1, COBOL, the old IBM programming cards. And so, nothing like it was today. And then I took my first marketing class, and it was just magic. I mean, this is for me. And so ended up getting a marketing minor in finance.
Yeah.
And just loved it and became an RA in the process, which is what absolutely launched the career.
So I want to go back to that marketing class.
Yep.
If you've listened to the podcast, you'll know my family homeschools. And so I'm constantly looking for ways to kind of open my kids' eyes to things. So was it something because those early marketing classes, it's really just the books.
That's a great lead into why I love this so much. So Bob Connor was one of the marketing professors at West Virginia, and he was an old Procter & Gamble executive.
Okay.
And go to the bookstore to get the book for the class, and there's no book. And so go to class first day, and Professor Connor comes and says, well, you probably went to the bookstore and realized there was no book. Well, let me tell you what.
That's awesome.
For those of you that are marketing people, you're going to love this class. For the rest of you, maybe marketing's not for you. He had a consulting company, and he would bring real world work that he was doing and case studies that he had done and taught from that perspective. And it was the most hands-on class. And it was just amazing. I remember one of the things stuck with me. We were talking about labeling and instructions. He calls me to the front of the class, Bayless, and this young lady, Kathy Nicolin, who was in the class. Can't believe I still remember her name. And he takes off his tie, stands us back to back, puts the tie around her neck. It's like, okay, Bayless, give her the instructions to tie that tie. As an example of the level of detail that you need to write instructions so that someone could follow them.
Yeah.
Of course, the tie looked horrible by the time that I, had done it. But the whole creativity aspects of marketing, the whole sales concept, just really, hit me in terms of.
What an awesome example! I mean, I never would have come up with that, but that's perfect.
He was my favorite professor, and then they had another guy, Charlie Hooper, taught human resources and personnel management. And West Virginia was a big union state. And, the coal mines, the steel industry. And WVU's within their business college, their labor relations program was absolutely tops. And Charlie Hooper, when he wasn't teaching at the university, was a labor negotiator.
Okay.
And so he just had such perspective in terms of labor relations and those type of things. And this is one of the big auditorium classes, Human Resources 101. The first day he comes in, sits down, he's like, I don't want anyone worrying about he may use a little profanity actually back then, and their darn grades. If you're going to worry about your grades and not pay attention and really get out of this what I want you to, I don't want you to be here. If you want an A, just raise your hand right now, I'll give you an A. Like 6 kids raised their hand. I was shocked there was only that many, and he gave A's right there. And then the rest of us worked to earn them. The whole business school at WU back then, a lot of Procter & Gamble executives that had been over in Ohio, Cincinnati, where they were located, came over. One guy, Dr. Pittman, had been the product manager for Pampers and a couple product lines. So just great teachers, real hands-on and real influential. And so really enjoyed it.
So this intersection with student housing happens in WVU. I know you're a Allen O'Hara guy. So
yes, sir.
I'm very familiar with Granville Towers and Chapel Hill and the legacy there. So
I was at a sister property to those properties called Summit Hall.
Okay.
And I was actually living there, so was a resident. And Jamie, who's my wife of 39 years.
Congratulations.
And thank you. The wind beneath my wings. I mean, behind my success story is absolutely her. Once I met her, everything in my life took focus, and absolutely I became the most driven human being you'd ever meet. Up until that time, I was still figuring out college a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I'd had a little bit too much fun one semester and came home for Christmas break. The report card came, and my steelworker father that I mentioned to, you may think about your typical steelworker. Yeah. He opened the report card, and I believe I had a 1.25 that semester.
Oh, wow.
And he opened it up, he put it on the table, and he said, son, I'm done. It's on you. You will not get one more penny from me for college. And best thing that ever happened. So I had to pay for my own education from that point forward. Great life lesson. And so I applied for the RA job because I absolutely had to have the job to continue with school.
Yeah.
And so became an RA at Summit Hall. To this day, the role of the RA in our business and the role of the community assistant now, as they're called, to me, it's the heart of the industry. It is everything that we aspire to accomplish as companies on the front line with our student team members. They're either making it happen or not making it happen. It's all about the culture and that we create. And I happen to work for a resident director by the name of Frank Witt. Was in the end, I think he just left the industry to go manage a campground in West Virginia. Okay. And Frank stayed with EDR his whole career till he retired. And Frank was an incredible resident director, a great leader. He and his wife Penny still dear friends. All of us on that RA staff kind of stayed together. And we actually worked under at the time, the on-site manager really wasn't at the top of his game. And I'll tell you, that RA staff carried that building. We really carried it through, and so became exposed to it, fell in love with it. At that time, E. Gordon Gee, who is the retiring president of West Virginia right now, he was the president of West Virginia. It was his first job as a university president. He then went on to Ohio State, Vanderbilt, Brown, back to Ohio State, Colorado, came back home to West Virginia a couple of years ago to retire. But when he first came to WU back in the 80s, he was really trying to improve the quality of education, significantly raised academic entrance requirements, raised out-of-state tuition, and it caused enrollment to dip from about 22,000 to 17,000. And so for the first time in Morgantown, there became a soft student market.
Yeah.
And so I'm on the RA staff. I'm taking my marketing classes, and I'm just obsessed with, hey, there shouldn't be a vacancy in this building. We've got the best property. So we're at RE orientation. And I start, talking about marketing idea, and the rest of the staff's like, dude, Bill, calm down, man. We're trying to get through Maslow's today to, resident programming. And so, but really though, it was that experience in that market that I realized I really wanted to turn student housing into a business.
Yeah.
And, if you took a real estate class back in the 80s, Edward Kelly was the chief author of IREM. And if you literally go find the textbook, Property Management 101 from 1983-84, the only mention of student housing is in a chapter that's titled Types of Tenants. And the last paragraph says students. And I quote, I'm maybe paraphrasing just a little bit, but give me vacancies before you give me students. Mm-hmm. They won't pay their rent. They have no sense of loyalty. They'll tear up the property. You would rather have a vacant unit than lease to a student.
Wow.
And so from a business perspective and a commercial real estate perspective, and I don't know what UNC Charlotte was like where you went at that time, but back in the 80s at WVU, you had the on-campus residence halls that were built in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the towers that were built in the 60s. And then off-campus was nothing but low-quality, absentee landlords, just terrible quality housing. You then had the commercial real estate industry being taught, avoid student housing at all costs. It's a bad credit risk. It's not a good business. And the movie Animal House came out right around the same time. And so, having, the desire to build a career in the business, it was a challenging time to do so. And for me, my first student housing mentor, you may remember Tom Trubiana, also at EDR. So Tom was my first mentor. And Tom had gone to West Virginia about a decade before me, came through the Summit Hall, RA staff, just like I did. And Tom had an offer to go to a company called Cardinal Industries. Okay. And Cardinal was a phenomenal company. They were the second largest builder in America behind Trammell Crow at the time. They had developed nearly 1,000 apartment communities, 200 hotels and retirement centers. It was all modular. To this day, one of the most incredible technological modular processes I'd seen. Their tagline was the world's largest provider of shelter products. But it was tax shelter products. Okay. And that before the tax law changes of 1986, real estate was a real good tax write-off business. Sure. And so Cardinal would syndicate. Basically, they had figured out from the modular process they could build for, these aren't the exact numbers. Back in that day, they could build the modular product for $30 a foot. They could get it valued at $42 a foot from financing, finance out all their development profits, then go off and syndicate all the cash flows in the property in 30,000 chunks. Right. And so they were the largest syndicator of real estate in the U.S. So every one of these properties they built, they would form limited partnerships. Then they would go finance them with the local savings and loans. Yeah. The RTC, the Resolution Trust Corporation, was in large part created out of the bankruptcy that occurred at Cardinal Industries after the tax laws of 1986 changed. Gotcha. And so Tom had been hired there before everything unraveled with the tax law changes in 88. And he formed Cardinal Campus Communities and invited me to come on as his director of marketing and business development. Okay. And so went there with Tom from 88 to 91. Okay. And unfortunately, we did a deal at Cornell, deal at Georgia Southern, Washington College, in Chestertown, Maryland, back in the late 80s. The bankruptcy hit. Tom, being extremely talented, was tapped to work within the bankruptcy and stayed on at Cardinal, whose main business was apartments. So the student housing was disbanded. And I spent a year working in the bankruptcy, which was great. The only part of my career that was ever outside of student housing. And I did lender workouts. And I also somehow was charged with communications and coordinating between the New York law firm, which was Skadden, Arps, Meagher, and Flom, and the investor base. Gotcha. Real fun? Not at all. Real challenging, but it was an incredible education.
From a geography standpoint, you're not
Columbus,
in West Virginia.
Ohio.
You're in Columbus, Ohio.
Cardinal's in Columbus, Ohio. Okay. And so, at that point in time, and there was another gentleman who had worked at Cardinal that left, ended up going to Houston. Okay. And he called me up and said, hey, there's this company, Century Development, And if you research them, they built the skyline of Houston, Allen Center, Greenway Plaza, the summits where the Rockets used to play. That's now, I think, Joel Osteen's church.
Yeah.
And he sent me an article that they had just done an on-campus transaction at the University of Houston.
Okay.
And so reached out to him, and it happened to be, a university in their hometown. They, had an opportunity to help.
Yeah.
And so ended up going there and working at Century for 2 years. And the same thing with Cardinal and Century. Even Allen O'Hara. Allen O'Hara's primary business was hotels.
Yeah.
They grew up with Holiday Inn.
Yeah.
And had built, I think, 50% of all the Holiday Inns in America, and were the manager of Holiday Inns. And all the student assets they have were actually owned by Northwestern Mutual Life. And
Right.
Allen O'Hara was the developer and manager. And so Allen O'Hara student was core to them, but not really. Their hotels was their main business. Cardinal was apartments. Century was office. And so especially with Cardinal and Century, they were real estate companies. Again, go back to that textbook. Student housing. Might be interesting. But no one really wanted to just jump in and do it. And so at Century, though, I started working the on-campus P3s. Did 8 transactions with them on campus, 2 at UT San Antonio, University of Texas Tyler, LSU Shreveport, Oklahoma City University, and was getting that program off the ground in the public-private partnerships.
And this is the same Century that eventually sold at least the campus division to CLV, correct, out of Australia? Okay.
It is. And so that was I did the first round of development for them. And it's
Gotcha.
there I met Gary Gibson. I recruited Gary Gibson, Mark Harry's there, folks that common folks we have from our past.
Yeah.
It was all, in every case, it was people that were intrigued by student housing, but they really weren't committed.
Yeah.
And so how American Campus ended up coming to be.
Yeah, this is what this is the part that I've kind of missed along the way, from West Virginia to this point. So that's been fantastic to get that understanding.
And kind of the key thing I left out is my wife and I had both of our kids in college. So when I left Morgantown, both of our kids were born before I graduated, in between them being born. My wife ended up finishing her career in Austin 12 years later. But so we had both kids. We were dirt poor. And so we were moving around with our young family. We're now in Houston, Texas, working for Century. And it's 1993.
Okay.
So I graduated in 86. So EDR, Cardinal Industries, Century Development, all real quick in that space. And I got a call from a headhunter. And they were looking for a manager for Doby Center, which is a 27-story high-rise at the University of Texas, built in the 60s. Great asset.
I had it in my portfolio for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So.
And the story at Doby is it had gone into bankruptcy.
Yeah. And
as I understand this is one of my life lessons. And so Doby had been, great asset right next to campus, closer to the university classrooms and many of the university dorms or residence halls. The owner of the building at the time, back then, everybody's always obsessed with ancillary revenue in student housing. And I always caution, make sure you focus on taking care of your student and the student revenue first. Yeah. Then look at ancillary and make sure, because once you start running an ancillary service, you're viewed only being as good as all the services you provide.
Yeah.
And so in this case, shows my age, Wes, the big thing back in the late 80s was owning your own phone switch and doing these real creative services like call waiting and hold and call forwarding. And so as I understand it, the owner of the building had put in his own phone switch and was trying to make money off the phone service and didn't implement it very well.
Yeah.
And the students became livid. And it ended up cratering the occupancy of a building that had always been full because they were mad over the ancillary revenue.
Yeah.
And so the property ended up in bankruptcy. And a gentleman who was a limited partner in the deal was a guy named Joseph Domberger. And Joseph Domberger, incredible life story, a German Jew that had barely escaped Hitler's wrath in World War II, left it, but then went back to Germany after the war. And Domberger, when I met him, this is 1993, I think he was 72 years old. And he had invested in the U.S. as a limited partner in numerous real estate transactions. And he was just a guy that never walked away from a deal. He always felt like if he was in a transaction, he was going to do everything he could to make everybody whole and do the right thing. And so he ended up putting together a competing plan of reorganization for the Doby Center. Lincoln National Life held the first lien on the building and went to them, convinced them to share the first lien, which I've never heard of a lender doing.
Yeah.
But Domberg's like, I'll invest and sit with you as long as, and help you turn it around. And so he ended up with the building, and they were looking for a property manager. That's where I get a call from the headhunter. And at that point, having fun at Century, doing the development stuff, like, I don't want to be a property manager. That's in my past, blah, blah, blah. But, I loved it more than anything, candidly. But and so I referred a friend to go to the interview. And so the friend, Todd Engstrom, who, a long time.
Been at Doby forever.
Was there for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so Todd goes to the interview, and he calls me up afterwards and said, hey, really interesting in that representatives from the owner in Germany were in the meeting. And what it was, they had hired a local apartment management company that really knew nothing about student housing to be the property manager. And the property manager and owner were together interviewing for the general manager. And so Todd called me back and told me that. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wow, it's really odd. And obviously, they don't have a management company that really understands the business. I called the headhunter back and said, hey, I'd like to throw my hat in the ring for that manager position. And that I wanted to meet the ownership. So went on an interview. And on that interview, I think you may have come across Wayne Senecal in his career. So Wayne Senecal worked for Joseph Domberger and ran his U.S. portfolio. And so
Wayne's based in New York.
Schenectady, New York.
Yeah.
And so Wayne was overseeing all of Domberger's holdings in the country and doing all those workouts for him. And met Wayne and had the conversation where, hey, I'm not really interested in having a property management position, but I'd love to talk to you all about starting a student housing company to take over the management. And so Mr. Senecal talked to Mr. Domberger. Mr. Domberger flew over. And here in Austin, you've heard of Zilker Park, where all the folks are right. So it was a barbecue. Bruce Todd was the mayor of Austin. He was there. Domberger, dignitary coming in to visit and owning Doby. So it was Domberger's, Mr. Senecal, and then an attorney out of Dallas that represented them, Sam Glast. And it was at that barbecue here at Zilker Park that I pitched the idea to them to start American Campus Communities, to become the manager of Doby Center that would allow me to launch a student housing company solely focused on student housing. And so Mr. Domberger said, Bill, I'm 72 years old. I'll give you the management fee for that building the revenue. I think it was like $282,000. But I don't want to put any equity. And so we started American Campus on the 27th floor of Doby Center.
And how old are you at this?
I'm 29. And just don't know what I don't know. A lot of times I say the success that I had is because I was just not experienced enough to know I was taking too much risk and should have stopped. But amazingly, this is a great Austin story. Several years before, Michael Dell on the 27th floor of Doby Center had started building computers out of his dorm room and became Doby Center. So, 2 decades later, two of the largest public companies in Austin, Texas, had both started on the 27th floor of that student residence hall.
So I've got a milestone story with Doby that I have to tell you about. So when I was at Campus Evolution Villages, we were managing the property. I think we had it under management for maybe 6 months or so. And I came down with our CFO. We were doing just kind of a property tour. I think it was a new CFO that we had at the time, and just kind of getting him, acquainted to what student housing was, because he didn't come from the industry. And so it's a group of us, and we're at this point in time. Now, at that time, was the Doby, the bottom floors were Doby mall at that time? Okay.
Absolutely.
So it was still being used as a mall. I think they were looking. I think AMC was looking at it as a theater. Or maybe
the old Doby Theater was there, which was classic.
Yeah, and we were eating lunch in that cafeteria, and so by this point, my wife and I had 3 kids, and we just got back from. I'd had the surgery scheduled. This is right around spring break time, because I had it scheduled for the Masters. Because that's what guys do.
Well planned.
Right? And so we were down here before that, and heck interface may have been going on at the time. I'm sitting there, and we just got finished visiting my sister in Wilmington, and we had this whole conversation about her and my brother-in-law trying for, I think, their second at the time. And anyway, my wife sends me a picture of a pregnancy stick as I'm sitting in the Doby Center eating lunch, and it's positive. And that was just the conversation with my sister and brother-in-law were on my mind, and I was like, oh, that was quick. And so we keep going back and forth in this text conversation. She's like, what do you think I'm sending you? She's like, that's my pregnancy test.
Oh, that's all.
That
just
was
incredible.
That was
that number
three
3?
girls. That was number 4, my only boy.
I have 3 older sisters. I have lived your son's life. He is going to be tougher than nails. He's going to have an aversion, though, to getting slapped on the back. I would rather be punched in the face than slapped on the back, because that's what my 3 older sisters will always do.
Yeah. Well,
How old is he now?
So he's 9.
He and I need to have a conversation at some point. I got a lot of pointers to give him.
I was just having a conversation earlier today. He is this kid that just is constantly creating. I cannot keep up with him. Right now he's into animatronics.
Oh, wow.
And if he'll watch a YouTube video of, animatronics being made, and he's hunting materials to try to replicate it. And if he can't find a piece of cloth, he's grabbing a piece of cardboard or something. And he's 9.
Sounds like the next Elon Musk, perhaps.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, so that's my Doby story. So anytime someone brings up history with Doby, I've got that connection.
That's a pretty good life-changing story.
So yeah, absolutely. So that's the kickoff. I've always heard Doby Center was the kickoff of ACC.
That was the kickoff. And then, because Mr. Domberger, it was very clear that he didn't want to invest equity, but he would contribute the fee as it relates to the development work that we were doing. And really, when you look at some of the early innovative financing structures in the on-campus P3 arena, the project-based tax-exempt bond financing. The first transaction I ever used that on was at Langston University in Langston, Oklahoma, on a deal that was awarded in 1994. And I had to have a financing that was 100% project-based, because I had no equity to put in a deal. What's the old saying? The mother of invention is necessity.
Yeah.
And so that was very much the case. And candidly, in a structure that there was a local bond attorney here in Austin named Tom Leonard, and a banker from Oppenheimer Company out of Austin, Elizabeth Jick. And they had actually used that model in the early and mid-'80s to finance some of the first private prisons. And so that's where the genesis of that model for on-campus P3 came from.
Okay.
And then at the same time, and I got the best part of this story, and we'll come back to this at the end, because of the misperceptions that everybody had of student housing, because of the textbook, because of Animal House, all of the false perceptions people had. I had 3 poster boards back then to try to sell people on the merits of the business. And one of those poster boards was titled The Disney Way. And I would always say to folks, in the 70s and 80s, think of what the brand and perception of Disney was. And I would say, hey, look, you've been to Disneyland, you've been to Disney World. American campus is going to be to student housing what Disney is to the experience they give their customers. We're going to build high-quality products. We're going to maintain them impeccably. And we are going to create an experience for the residents. In this case, environments conducive to academic success. That is the product. That is the experience.
What's amazing is Disney comes back into this picture.
It's unreal. I get chills every time I tell the story. And so we'll get close to that at the end. But I had those poster boards. The Texas A&M University system, Prairie View A&M University, which is the historically black college of the Texas A&M University system, they had an incredible president, Dr. Charles Hines, a retired 3-star general, and a degree in psychology from Howard University. one of the most impressive human beings I've ever met in my life. Was a very handsome man, looked like Lou Gossett Jr. When he would speak, you could see where men would follow him in the battle.
Yeah.
And I went down and made the sales pitch in Prairie View. He really had just taken over the presidency. And he looked at me, and I had heard from so many universities, "Oh, Bill, I'd love to be your second client." And Prairie View was actually the first one to say yes, a little bit ahead of Langston, 1990, late 94, early 95. And President Hines, we got done. He's like, "Mr. Bayless, we're going to do this. I want to do the transaction." And all of a sudden, I'm like, "Oh my goodness, someone's actually saying yes.
I'll do this."
I don't have any equity. How's this going to get done?" And so Mr. Domberger had been doing banking with Texas Commerce Bank here in Austin with Merriman Morton, who was doesn't sound like a banker name. Merriman Morton was the chairman of Texas Commerce Bank, which later became part of Chase. We sat down with Merriman Morton, and Barry Thompson was the chancellor of the A&M system. And President Hines called a meeting in Prairie View, Texas. Chancellor Thompson came down. Merriman Morton came down. I and Wayne Senecal went down. And President Hines gave his vision of his transformation in Prairie View A&M University. And it was unbelievable in terms of his vision and how he laid it out. And he looked at me, "Mr. Bayless, will you build this housing?" "Yes, sir, we will." "Chancellor Thompson, do I have your support?" "Absolutely." Merriman Morton jumped out of his chair before he even turned and said, "Yes, we'll finance the transaction." And so Texas Commerce Bank made 100% loan. This is not a tax-exempt bond. This is a commercial bank loaned 100% loan to cost to finance American Campus's first development on a ground lease.
Wow.
And so it was just an amazing transaction. It really launched the company. Back then, the Wall Street Journal used to do an insert regionally. It was called the Texas Journal. And an article got picked up about this innovative transaction was done at Prairie View. And all of a sudden, my phone started ringing. And for the first time, venture capital out of Wall Street started showing an interest.
Yeah.
And so Mr. Domberger, and God bless him, is like, "Bill, I told you I don't want to invest equity, but I don't want to hold back the company. If you want to go and capitalize the company, would be happy to step aside."
Yeah.
And so we hired LaSalle Partners out of Chicago. Earl Webb, who became the CEO when it was JLL, was handling the account. And he had a young analyst named Bubba Nickel, who I don't know if you remember American Campus.
I know the name.
but Bubba Nickel came in at 24 years old as financial analyst on the transaction, ended up stealing Bubba in that process.
Yeah.
And we went to New York and raised venture capital. It was 1997. Scott Reckler, Rex and Associates, now Rex Corp, put in up $50 million to capitalize American Campus. We bought out Mr. Domberger and Mr. Senecal. And now we had the opportunity to start to develop and acquire off campus. And by that point in time, we were already beginning to dominate the on-campus P3 amazingly. And so that was really the launch of the company from a capitalization perspective. And during that period, we grew from no owned assets to about $250 million. As fate would have it, when the world seems like it's falling apart, it's always the greatest opportunity you can imagine. So when I met Scott Reckler,
you must be feeling great after this past week.
Oh man, I got to tell you, I'm old enough to know. Don't fret. It's all cycles. It's all short term. It all comes back. And student housing's always the best investment during macro times like this. So it's a good thing for our space. But Scott Reckler, who, if you watch CNBC, Scott's on there now about every week. He's the guru of all things New York office real estate. Yeah. But Scott had put $50 million into American Campus, and he was forming a fund. And he was going to put American Campus into the fund, but he did our deal before he got the fund deal done.
Oh, okay.
And so we got rolled in under the fund. I actually recruited Tom Trubiana back for a while, joined us in the early years from 93 to 02, and worked with us American Campus. And then as that fund was formed, Rexon made a bunch of high-tech investments along with their real estate investment in American Campus. And then come 2001, 2002 was the first big tech bust. And so that fund ended up in bankruptcy.
Okay.
And so for us, now I wasn't upset about that because the cost of capital to American Campus from that fund was 16.87 compounded monthly. That was, again, go back to the textbook. No one looked at this as a mainstream real estate investment. Yeah. And so simultaneously, we had launched all the on-campus P3 business. Michael Crow had just come to ASU. And we were beginning to talk to ASU. And at that point in time, also, it was just evolving that some of these on-campus public-private partnership models, the 501c3 tax-exempt bond, while off balance sheet, ultimately may not be off credit.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, the concept of the on-campus equity investment and the private ownership of the on-campus transactions, and ASU really wanted credit protection first and foremost. And so part of my main motivation in taking American Campus public was to have the opportunity to develop the on-campus P3 equity model.
Right.
And so Scott, his fund had just gone into bankruptcy. I'm listening, they're a public company. I'm listening to his earnings call, and his investors are just beating the snot out of him in terms of, we got to liquidate that fund. And so go to New York and meet with Scott and tell him I want to take American Campus public. And most people just laughed. Scott, who is the ultimate entrepreneur, loves a challenge. Is like, you want to take a company public in an industry that not only doesn't exist, but that people have a negative perception of. It's like, but the perception's wrong.
Yeah.
And I always believe the student housing was the best risk-adjusted return of real estate. And so Scott's like, what do we got to lose? So the beauty, he brought in Citigroup, J.P. Morgan, Deutsche Bank, Wilkie Farr, the Council of New York. So he brought together a world-class team.
So I want to, really quick, I want to go back to your wife. Do you have this conversation with her before you have that conversation with Scott?
And I am the luckiest man in the world. And my wife, who, by the way, is smarter than I am, and candidly, she was interviewing for the same RA position I did, and she decided she wanted to withdraw, and I think she withdrew because she knew they'd hire her instead of me, and she didn't want us to break up.
In 39 years, you haven't got her to admit to that?
No. She never once in my career has my wife ever complained about me missing a kid's event, not being there. She has been the most supportive spouse. If I would say I'm thinking about it, she would say, then go do it. Make it happen.
That's
and
awesome.
so always instilled confidence, always instilled belief, and made me feel comfortable taking risk and taking chances. There was a conversation laying awake in bed the night before I got on that plane to New York.
Yeah.
And so, absolutely.
At that point in time, there's so much opportunity in student housing, and you're clearly seeing it. And there's got to be this, I've got to go after it.
And the challenge was the cost of capital was horrific. I mean, the thing that was most significant about American Campus's IPO is it wasn't the creation of a public company. It was the institutionalization of an industry.
Yeah.
And so if you look at, and I got to tell you, that IPO barely happened. I mean, we went public. We were on our roadshow the same time Google was. We kept running into them.
Okay.
At the, when you're on an IPO roadshow, you're in New York, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, and you're meeting with the same investor bases. And so we kept running it. Theirs worked out just fine, by the way. But again, people go back to that textbook. People had misperceptions. People were afraid of the industry. People just didn't have the comfort level with the institutionalization that we now see that everybody, the whole world's excited about investing in student housing. But that IPO was the introduction of the asset class to Wall Street, to global investors. And as they saw the stability of cash flows and the performance, it came to trade inside of multifamily at times. And so it really created a paradigm shift in the cost of capital available to the entire industry. And again, for us, it was the ability then to launch the on-campus equity model, which became a business in and of itself in that regard. And then, the 18 years of ACC as a public company, everybody knows the story, and then so many. And it really, when you look at the people then that walk through the doors and all the great companies that have been formed and all the incredible success that they've had and taken things to the next level, now the industry, certainly is at a mature stage and institutional, and a lot of great things and opportunities for everybody.
When I got involved, in the industry, ACC was, established, and I was actually working for a developer that was basically creating properties that he knew that ACC would eventually own, and so we kind of followed what you guys were doing from that standpoint. But I've always worked for, competitors, and trying to recruit anyone from ACC was so hard. They did not want to leave.
It was, I would call it a movement. The culture of American campus was just amazing. And, we love what we did. We worked hard, we played hard, but we all felt we were part of something much, much bigger than just what we were doing. And this really gets into I think one of the unique aspects of what we accomplished in those years at American campus as a CEO, the most profound, impactful position I had ever had in the industry was as a resident assistant.
Oh, wow.
Being on site. I mean, it was the foundation of my entire career.
Yeah.
And so many of the folks in senior management had started, Jennifer Deese, who was the president COO, had started as an RA. So many of the people that are now leading it as a Blackstone company are all folks that started as student staff members. You had a consistency of understanding from, a couple of the companies I worked in, and I told early in the story, it was ivory tower. I mean, they didn't want to listen to the field. I won't say which company. One of those companies, when I went in and pitched a huge idea that I had, said, "Oh, Bill, slow down and wait your turn." That's the day I decided I was leaving that company. Mm-hmm. And so as a manager and as a leader, always adopted, and if there's any counsel that I can give anyone listening to this podcast who's managing people, whether you're a facilities maintenance manager, a general manager, a leasing manager, regional manager, actually there's a couple things I would tell them. One, always have an open door policy. And I always used to tell folks, and I still tell folks, if you have an opinion, you get paid to give it. And if you think that we as a company are heading in the wrong direction or we've made a mistake, come talk to us. And you don't have to talk to your direction. I don't care. I hate an organizational chart in the context of people think they can only talk to their supervisor. Yeah. Talk to anyone in the chain of command you can. Yeah. And so I would tell folks when a team member comes in and cares enough to say, "Hey, I think we're making a mistake or I don't understand this," you have an obligation to sit down with them and to logically take them through, okay, here's what we were evaluating when we made this decision. And this is what we were trying to accomplish. And these are the things we evaluated. This is how we prioritized them. And here's how we logically came to that decision. Okay, you're getting a chance to mentor someone that cared. And now you may be exposing them to a thought process that they haven't advanced their career yet that they can see. Now, that would happen about 85% of the time. The real value of those open door conversations is when you would have a staff member, someone in the field that's close to the customer, close to the problem, that said, "Yeah, okay, Bill, but when you were saying you evaluated this, this, and this, you didn't mention this." And also like, "Well, I didn't know about that." And that's the piece of information that would have caused us to make a different decision. Yeah. And so that open door policy, to me, so many companies fail because they don't have a culture by which they can correct their mistakes. Yeah. And so in that process, one of three things happens. Either you mentored the person and they learned something that's valuable to them in the future. They brought something to light that was a critical missing variable in how you did make that decision, and now you have a chance to fix it. Or, you know what? They may just disagree with the conclusion you reached, but everybody got a chance to talk about it. Now let's go out and make it happen. Yeah. And so that culture, I think, creates so much buy-in that it's just unbelievable. The other thing, and this next piece of counsel is how I built my entire career. When you're hiring someone, people tend, as you interview people, to view people in one of two ways. Oh, that's someone I'm comfortable with. That's someone I could mold into what I want. Right. And then they interview people that, "Oh my God, that aggressive person wants my job. Holy cow." So many times, I would say the majority of times, people hire who they're comfortable with instead of the person that is absolutely perhaps the most aggressive and does want their job. And I always tell folks, if you gain the skill of being able to identify talent and to put that talent into positions where it can be exploited for the good of all.
Yeah.
You're now creating the highest caliber value for yourself in being that's how you become C-level, is when you can do that. And then the other the third piece of that, everybody has strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. Everybody, including me, beyond being short, bald, and ugly. And a real manager, you take the time to learn people's strengths, you take the time to learn people's weaknesses, and then from there, you put them in a position where their strengths, again, are exploited for the benefit of the organization, and their weaknesses are mitigated. Yeah. And I got to tell you, that is, I think, the real differentiation in the success of senior managers and C-level people. And that I would even see among my own staff that a lot of time they didn't have that skill. And they would end up taking someone that had great talent, but putting him in the wrong slot to where their weaknesses weren't properly supported. Mm-hmm. And so those three things in unison, the culture, the open door, exploiting the people's strengths and supporting their weaknesses, that's the secret sauce for any organization to achieve greatness. Yeah. And when you do it in a proper culture, people get so bought in and work so passionately and hard.
Did that philosophy come from, obviously there's a lot of experience behind it, but, is it something that, academically you learned, through reading leadership books and that type of thing? Or I go back to the story that you mentioned earlier about yourself as an RA, and you were certainly that person that was like, I'm going to figure this out and make this better.
Well, it
was ingrained in you.
Go back to one. I would say you have two type of mentors in your life. You have mentors that you just respect and you want to emulate, and you have mentors that you felt frustrated under and didn't feel motivated, and you know exactly how you don't want to do things. Yeah. And so I would say early in my career, I paid great attention to both of those. I have to, my dad, the old steelworker, when I left for Texas, looked at me and said, son, outwork them. Yeah. And so that blue collar work ethic and getting in the trenches with folks and always, always being willing to do whatever you're asking someone to do, I think is critical in terms of getting that buy-in. Go back to that football coach story. And, I don't believe that I as a human being can motivate any other human being. I believe every bit of motivation that we have totally comes from within ourselves. What we can do as managers and as companies is to create a culture where self-motivation flourishes. Yeah. And I think organizations ultimately fall into one of those two categories. Either they fall into a category where they suppress that self-motivation and people feel like they have a job, or they create an environment where that self-motivation flourishes and the passion of the organization just carries it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to get back to Disney.
Yeah.
Are you ready to parlay into that again?
So, and this is, when you talk about karma and fate and all those type of things. So 2018, it's American Campus's 25th year anniversary. Company gets a phone call from Disney. And I ended up having a conversation with a gentleman named George Kalogridis, who was the president of Walt Disney World. Okay. And he asked me if I'd ever heard of the Disney intern or Disney college program. I'm like, no, sir, I haven't. And
really?
I had not heard of it. I had not heard of it. And so George explains the program to me. And, at any given point in time, they have as many as 10,000 interns that are either upperclassmen or recent college graduates that are working in all areas of their business. Yeah. And George, 40 years ago, had been in the first class. And so it was their CA program, their feeder system where they look for talent. And he explained that they had been, they own 2 multifamily apartment complexes. They had been leasing others across Orlando on the other side of I-4. And they were spending a fortune on logistics of trying to get all these interns to work in the hotels, the park, all the different areas. Mm-hmm. And they were getting ready to break ground. They had gone fairly far down the road in terms of what they thought they wanted to build. And he's like, hey, we know of the work you all do on college campuses. Thought maybe we ought to talk to you to get your ideas on if you think we're going in the right direction. Yeah. So went down, met with them. They laid out kind of their vision and approach and said, well, what do you think? I'm like, well, it's not exactly how we'd probably approach it. I'm like, well, how would you approach it? I'm like, do you have time to make some road trips? And so we took them out to UC Irvine, where we had built 5,000 beds on campus. Took them to our properties in Orlando that we had developed. And a couple weeks later, George asked if I'd come back down to town. And he says, Bill, Disney is best in class at everything that we do. It's obvious to us when it comes to housing, you're best in class. How would you like to privately own the Disney College program?
Oh, wow.
Think of that poster board.
Yeah.
So 25 years after saying we're going to emulate and become the Disney of student housing, Disney is asking us to own, and we built 10,400 beds to house their team that is implementing their mission. And so if that is not karma, if that is not full circle, only in America.
Yeah.
And so to me, that was the, and I'm a spiritual person, and whether, blessing or whether you believe in manifestation, if it's to be, it's up to me.
Yeah.
And so to me, that was in the 25th year of having held up that sign and then to have that occur. It was pretty incredible experience.
That is awesome. So timing wise, that's
2018.
2019. So how long between, kind of that conversation and them saying ACC is going to partner with us on this? How long before sticks start going up in the air?
Yeah, we hit the ground running. I mean, from that meeting, we were full force in pre-development the next week.
Wow.
And so it was within 12 months, we were breaking ground and going.
Wow.
And so 10,400 beds. I don't know of a larger residential development in America. It was 150 acres they land leased. And so the delivery was over actually 2 major phases of occupancy, 9 construction phases that were developed from 2019 to 2022.
Yeah.
Through COVID. I mean, COVID obviously caused a lot of issues.
You're clearly an operations guy.
First and foremost.
And not only did you really kind of standardize a lot of things that the entire industry does now, but as you're looking at this Disney thing and you're doing something, I mean, you call it corporate housing. I think it's just really another form of, call it graduate housing. How do you go through the process of picking, who's going to be on that first staff for that first delivery?
When it came to the Disney deal, was the best. That, it was putting the best talent on that transaction without a doubt. And so everybody, of course, wanted to be a part of it, but we handpicked the top performers in every area to put on it.
Yeah. That's
which was tough because the company has a ton of top performers. And so,
yeah.
It was, somewhere that you went. And being an operator, I think, is the greatest differentiator for success in everything that we do in our industry. And that one of the reasons I feel like we excelled as a developer and why we excelled with leading occupancy and excelled in leading revenue growth and all those things is because everything we did from a programming perspective, from a design perspective, was all about the student experience, was all thinking about it as an operator. Mm-hmm. And too many real estate companies, the development team does development and then they hand it over to the operators. And the operators really didn't have input into the actual unit design, the clubhouse design, the community design. And so to me, operations is the key to everything that we do, especially in this business. And, almost all other areas of residential housing, you're trying to emulate, multifamily, it's fine if you park at your door, feel like you have the privacy of a home and never interact.
Yeah.
Student housing, the interaction is the product.
Yeah.
How you site plan, how you building plan, how you program, how many points of interaction that you can make. One of the when I was at Cardinal, Austin Gerlinger, who was the CEO and founder of Cardinal Industries, is the first person I ever heard say, "Build for the masses, not the classes," which became my development mantra of my career. And if you look at so much of the operational success that I've had over the career, it's because from a program and design perspective, we always developed accommodations that allowed us to have differing price points within the same community that every member of a university's enrollment, regardless of their socioeconomic status, could lease in the same community, in the same great location, have the same great amenities, where so many companies just focus on the top price point.
Oh, and so much of the development that I've seen in this industry lately, it's going after the cream of the crop.
it's just not sustainable.
Can't afford
I mean,
it.
Every university enrollment is a demographic breakdown that emulates our society.
Yeah.
And so if everybody's, if you're building 20% of the beds in the market for the top 5% socioeconomic, math tells you it's not going to work for everybody long term.
Yeah.
And so, student housing, if you do it right, the stability of cash flows, I think probably the one thing that to me is still mind-boggling, when you look at 18 years as a public company, American Campus reported same-store rental rate growth, same-store rental revenue growth, and same-store NOI growth each and every year, except for fall 20, which was COVID impacted. It only went to 93%, but it was the first time one positive growth. But when you look at that stability of cash flows, I don't know of another sector that has ever been able to say that.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? You do that by building for the masses, not the classes, by building products that serve the whole university so you don't have volatility based on trying to serve one niche.
Yeah.
You do that by making sure that the customer experience and the brand loyalty is in place and you're continually sought after. And you do it also, I always like to say, and this is, in the world of institutional investment today, and I think this is happening in every area of the real estate sector. I always used to say, manage the business and the bottom line will take care of itself.
Yeah.
In that, hotels are a great example. We all travel. I kind of feel like today, from an operational perspective, maybe the Four Seasons still does it. You still feel like the brand is the brand and you get pampered.
Yeah.
Everywhere else you go, you kind of feel that I don't feel like customers are winning the value proposition anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think for the long-term stability of your cash flows, your people, your operational implementation, creating that experience, you're going to produce value when you do that.
Yeah.
And if you get too focused on just managing that bottom line, you're going to kill the product.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to get into what's happening now with Maslow's because I think you were starting to touch on that.
Yeah.
But I want to finish a couple things up in this
Sure.
this journey through ACC, and again, this goes back to you being an operator first. Technology, throughout my entire career, everyone looked at ACC as they've got lambs, they've got their own developers that are and. I've got to imagine a lot of it was because there wasn't a lot of property management systems you could pull off the shelf when you guys got started.
There was not.
How much of your philosophy impacted that decision versus just necessity?
Remember that 2 years of computer science major?
Yeah.
The good Lord gives you the experience you need to be successful. So you go back to when we were starting the company as an operator, and you're talking the early mid 90s.
Yeah.
And so the packages on the shelf were solely customized for the businesses they serve, and student housing just did not fit into it.
Yeah.
And so when we started ACC in 1993 and took over Doby Center, there wasn't a leasing system or revenue management system to fit it. Gary Gibson built out of DBase. I flow charted it out based on and we built the first operating system out of DBase.
Yeah.
Built our own general ledger, our own revenue management system, and just the off-the-shelf properties had a couple issues. One, they didn't do the buy the bed. They didn't do the biggest issue in student housing back then is you have 100% occupancy in your current units and you're pre-leasing all of those units for the next season. When some of the early companies went public that hadn't developed their own system, think about security deposit reconciliation and refunds of your security deposit. Mm-hmm. Everyone has to move out. You have to inspect every unit. By the way, the next thing you do is everybody's putting all those forms aside. Everybody's going and turning the property. Everybody's doing make ready. Mm-hmm. Everybody's getting ready to smile for moving and move everybody in. And it's only then, after you've got that next group of students in, that you then go back and finish the security deposit, get reconciliation, get all the checks out. Now, when you're a public company and you have to go through that reporting, the systems weren't built for it in the traditional systems. And you'll see some of the other companies had early reporting issues just because the systems weren't good enough to give the information that you needed.
Yeah.
And so out of necessity, we had to build our own in all candor.
Yeah.
And I had enough comfort as a computer science major. George DeCardenas, who was our chief technology officer that came from NASA, he was involved in the shuttle missions. And George always said, student housing's hard, but it's not rocket science. And so we had to. Now today, whole different world. There's been so much good investment in good companies that have, because of the institutionalization of student housing, it made sense for them to spend the money and to develop the systems. So now, for a student housing company starting out, it makes no sense to try to develop your own technology. There's great platforms out there you can leverage off of.
So for all the PMS systems that are out there right now, those companies that are listening to this, it sounds like you guys are in the hunt.
Maslow's is evaluating right now because we won't be developing our own system and we'll be picking one. So
nice. So
I'll have a long line over at the conference.
I think you'll have. What I like about that is I think there's also, obviously a spirit of innovation that you bring that I think is a little needed. So I'm excited for you guys to jump into that because a lot of times we would look at, as operators, we would look at the providers out there and say, we've got to have this, but we never had a big enough hammer, of an ACC. And, we'll get into Maslow's and what your growth thoughts are for that. But I've got to imagine that you're not doing this to be a little guy. So we'll jump into that. But let's talk about just really quick with the privatization, and because I think we've got a lot of listeners here that they may have only known ACC as private. Maybe they've just got into the industry in the past couple of years. But what was the need for having to go private? And
and when you're a public company, you have a fiduciary to always act on the best interest of your shareholders. And I love being a public company. Candidly, I'd never thought about life beyond ACC or ever thought of not being at ACC.
Yeah.
And so when the Blackstone transaction, you talk about the fulfillment of an accomplishment in our industry. For Blackstone, who is bar none, the most sophisticated investor in the world that everyone respects immensely, when they decided to make an offer to take American Campus public, to me, that was the fulfillment of, wow, we have all of the industry has done an incredible job to attract capital as sophisticated and significant as Blackstone. And that really, you talk about the final institutionalization of the industry and that we have accomplished what we all set out to do. To me, Blackstone buying American Campus was the epitome of that. As a public company, the disconnect, right now the market's inversed. Right now, when you look at the net asset value of where real estate stocks are trading, they're in better position than privately traded companies. Yeah. And that's when, from 2011 to 2018, we were able to use our public company capital to grow exponentially because we were trading at a significant benefit to private market valuations. After COVID, that flipped. And so you hit a period of time where the public real estate stocks were suppressed. The public markets always tend to reflect what's coming. Mm-hmm. And so the good news is I think better times are coming. And so I think Blackstone was very sophisticated and opportunistic, and they saw the growth that was coming in student and the tailwinds that were coming post-COVID. And they timed it, I thought, perfectly in terms of making a very good transaction for everybody involved. And so we weren't looking to sell. But as a public company, when someone comes in with an offer, you have a fiduciary to entertain it. Sure. And it candidly was a transaction that just made too much sense for the public shareholders, made great sense for Blackstone. It was a deal that needed to happen. Yeah. And I have to say, watching them transact is amazing. I mean, they are the best in the world at what they do. I think it's incredible for the industry that they own American Campus. I think it's incredible for the people at American Campus. And they treated me incredibly. Nothing but kudos and respect for the old shop and for Blackstone and what they're doing for the space.
So let's talk about, let me go back a year. You'd been out of the industry for about a year. I honestly, outside of speaking engagements and things. I didn't think we would ever see Bill Bayless again. He's going to go off and go do probably something completely opposite from student housing. And I'm getting ready to pack up to come to Austin for Interface. And you had just posted, it was a Sunday night. I remember like it was this past Sunday. And you post that you're launching Maslow's. And of course, the first thing I did was DM you and say, hey, let's get on the podcast and talk about it. And so, I was expecting you presented at NMHC was it this past year in Vegas or the year before?
It was
that?
Actually the year I had retired.
Yeah.
I had already been booked to do it in advance.
Yeah.
A couple years in advance.
Yeah. And so this past year I was, kind of expecting you'd probably make some kind of comment. And the best comment I heard from you, though, was because we're coming off of an election year, we were right in the middle of it in early October, and they provided, kind of a breakdown, NMHC did, of which candidate is going to provide what, what based off of their history, what's going to happen. And you were at the front of the room, and I think there was probably you, myself, and maybe 40 other people in the room. And the only thing I kept thinking the entire time, I'm going off on a little bit of a bunny trail, was where in the hell is everybody at?
Yeah.
There's over 600 attendees registered for this. And no, I understand it's the first day. It was at the end of like 5, 6 o'clock. I know a lot of folks were, headed to the casinos and everything, but you stood up and said, this needs to be at the beginning of each session, because there's some very important information. So I really expected this past fall you're going to make an announcement about your first project or something, but you've recently made an announcement.
Yep.
And let's talk about that.
Yeah. And so, and I, when I left ACC, I really thought I might retire. Going back to the wife story, it was about 3 weeks in to retirement. And
she wanted to know when you were going to go back to work.
I got to tell you what, and she was doing a little renovation project, and I gave a few opinions and may have asked a few vendors to do a few things that on some she looked at me, she's like, we have been married for 38 years because you haven't been here doing this. And so I realized I needed to do something else. There was a Fortune 50 company that had come out with an RFP for workforce housing. Mm-hmm. And one of the firms that was pursuing it called me up and said, hey, we want to chase this, but we don't have a residential development resume. We'd love you to join our team and use your development expertise in pursuing this. And this was right after the wife conversation. I'm like, yeah, I'd love to do it. And so well, hey, you need to form an entity to be able to pursue it. And so I called up my attorney, and they're like, well, you need a name. And I'm like, Maslow's Properties. And at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, from my time at West Virginia University through every company that I've ever worked, the pursuit of becoming the best that you can be and everyone that you touch and community becoming the best that they can be, that's always been the underlying foundation. That's how Maslow's hierarchy of needs, virtually every university in America uses that as the basis for their residence life and student development program. And it's core to our business. And so Maslow's Properties came out. And so started the Maslow's brand to pursue that workforce housing transaction. Ended up not coming to fruition completely. But I became obsessed with understanding the crisis in America of workforce and attainable housing. And it was bored, so went down the rabbit hole of really trying to figure out why that problem hasn't been solved. And ultimately, I believe Maslow's will solve that problem. Will be more than just student housing. I also was at a family reunion in West Virginia, and a cousin of mine said, hey, my home builder has this patent pending on a unique construction product. I'd like you to come take a look at it. Went and took a look at it, became enamored with it, invested in it, and actually formed a company that is taking that product to market, going through the patent pending process. But I was working about 80 hours a week on those two things. And so having, a good time doing that, and have a long-term business plan related to workforce housing. But as I'm now back full force working, William Talbot, who was the former chief investment officer at ACC, he always had a company holiday party around Christmas time. He has a party at his house, and a bunch of the old folks are there. All the way back. Bubba Nickel, Greg Dow, all the old folks.
I want to stop you right there because, every successful story has a Bubba somewhere in it, right?
My Lord.
And ACC was Bubba Nichols, but I know he went to New Zealand?
He went to Australia.
Australia.
He went to Australia.
And is he back now?
He's back. Living in Spicewood, Texas. Played golf with him this weekend. he went for it, and I'm so proud of Bubba. And so Bubba was my right hand from 1996 till 2010. And really, candidly, the person I was grooming to ultimately take the helm someday, I'll probably work till I'm 90, which is why Bubba ultimately said, I can't wait any longer. But Bub left in 2010, went to Australia, and formed a company, I believe it was called Urban Nest.
Okay.
And that sold. He did great. And then he went to London and worked in multifamily housing in London with the same capital source. Had a great outcome there, and has come back to Spicewood, Texas, where he plays a lot of golf. And he just recently has taken over a landscape company called Cleanscapes, which is a big Texas because he got bored. And so he's still an entrepreneur. He's still doing great things and still a dear friend.
I wanted to get caught up because you mentioned his name earlier, and I was like, I know he went to Australia or New Zealand.
No, and
what's happened to him?
And I got to tell you, he was. I've had so many great partners in my career that I would have never had success without any of them.
Yeah,
and it's a long list. Always hire people. Again, Bubba, the first time you meet, be like, oh my God, this guy wants my job and my boss's job. It's like, you're hired. Bring that passion, bring that fire.
All right, back to Maslow.
And so William had a holiday party, and they're like, what are you doing? And at that point, I'm really working some workforce housing stuff.
Yeah.
And so they decided to join me and William Talbot and Jennifer Beeson, Maslow's Properties. And we worked some of the workforce stuff. And then all of a sudden, I'm back working full time. And my non-compete was coming up before the conference. I'm like, okay, there's no reason not to get back in what I know best, what I love. Yeah. And again, when at the time the Blackstone transaction came about, wasn't looking to sell the company. And so realized I'm not done. And so Maslow's Campus Communities, and I announced it at the conference last year, in that I wanted to get the word out to the capital sources globally that I was coming back. And so, and that served the purpose. And it's certainly over between last year's conference and this year's conference, I'm the most blessed person in the world. And certainly, the track record of success was absolutely overwhelmed with the level of interest of folks that wanted to be involved in Maslow's capitalization. And the other thing that I was very focused on, and as it relates to student housing, I do view student housing in type of a bifurcated manner, and that you have the on-campus public-private partnerships and you have the off-campus business. And the off-campus business is real estate. The on-campus business is unique, and it really requires a different type of capital. It's got to be capital that understands that a university is looking for a long-term partner. They don't want someone that's going to build and sell this in 2 years. They want someone who's going to be their partner for decades. Yeah. They don't want you raising rents just because you can. This is their on-campus housing. They have to maintain affordability. Yeah. As a public company, I always told our investors, hey, we'll make the outsized rental rate growth and outsized IRRs off campus when the market allows that opportunity. Think of the on-campus business as a bond portfolio, coupon clipping, good, stable cash flows, very, very low risk. And so when I looked at capitalizing Maslow's, it was first and foremost from a perspective of we need to have different buckets of capital. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be one size fits all. And so really spent a great deal of time researching and talking to all the different types of capital out there, the differentiations in their return profiles, how they thought about hold periods, all those type of things. Ultimately, Pennybacker Capital here in Austin, and Tim Berry, who's the founder of Pennybacker, I've known for decades. Great shop, about $5 billion in assets under management. And as an investment fund manager, great track record, 20-year history, very highly regarded, largely, teachers, pension funds, things of that nature. Tim's mother was a teacher. His dad was a furniture salesman, fellow Texan. And what Pennybacker offered us was an opportunity not just to be a real estate platform, but to become our own fund manager and to raise our own funds for various segments of the business so that we could control all and offer investors the opportunity. We're not just going to manage your money. It's going to be a development platform, an operational platform. And so it really gives us full control over the capital sourcing. And it's important to me when I'm sitting in front of a college and university to know that I have the ability to control all the components of the transaction to deliver what it is for them. Yeah. And so Pennybacker is offering us that opportunity. They're partners in Maslow's, and so we have fully capitalized with them. We're excited about that. And first fund out of the box we'll be raising is a P3 fund, and then we'll look at off-campus funds. And then Pennybacker has an array of existing funds that we can also utilize in the interim.
Gotcha. So you think it'll be mostly new development? Do you think there will be acquisitions?
In the on-campus world, it'll be new development. Okay. And then in the off-campus world, acquisitions and new development. Obviously, the longest lead time is in off-campus development in terms of going out and sourcing those sites and all the competitive aspects there are for land. And I got to tell you, kudos to Landmark and Wes Rogers and Core and Mark Lipscomb and Dan Goldberg. Watching what they have done is amazing. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. And so my hat's off to them. Trying to compete with them out of the box and off-campus development. Back in the day, I always told people, Mike Moran, and who I grew up with in the industry, no one's kicked Bill Bayless's butt more than Mike Moran. And so, when you look at off-campus development today, what Landmark and Core are out there doing is just so impressive. Yeah. And so we'll, do what we can in there, try to make as much opportunity as we can. Acquisitions, I think, there's going to be good opportunities coming.
I see. You saw something yesterday in Statesboro that's, it's a property that was in my portfolio. It's never been in your portfolio, but it's, the piece of land is excellent. And, it's one of those properties that it saw its 30 years and now it's time to, and so there's a lot of opportunities like that I see, around the country. But I want to ask you on the P3 side, we hear things about enrollment cliffs, or excuse me, not enrollment cliffs, but demographic cliffs specifically with Gen Z. And, I work with a lot of, tertiary markets where things, it's weird. Some things are, bright and rosy, and they've had some of the best enrollment that they've had post-COVID, that they've had in years. And then others that I don't know if the universities just didn't react or if it had more to do with, with other things in those markets. But as you're talking to universities, where do you see kind of that opportunity? Is it at the Prairie View?
From a capital deployment perspective and people investing equity, everybody is focused on the Power Four and the Carnegie R1 research institutions. I mean, and COVID really highlighted that in higher education in the next 2 decades, there's going to be winners, there's going to be losers, and there's going to be consolidation. Even with some of the negative demographic population growth of that age group that you hear about, the reality is when you look at applications and admission at your Power Four conference schools, it's through the roof. University of Texas had 92,000 applications. Yeah. And so the flagships are going to continue to do fantastic. Your regional schools and tertiary schools, I think there may be a tough road to hoe. And how much consolidation takes place within university systems, I think is something everybody needs to watch.
Tell me if you agree with this. I feel like the perfect opportunity for those schools is to really get into the trades. Is that something that...
It certainly would be a means of expanding and the base they serve. Yeah. And also, so many of those schools tend to be more commuter-based and regional in nature to where they could serve more the local communities where they are and the regional communities where they are. Yeah. And with, especially some of the activities that are taking place right now under this administration,
the
trades are going to come back.
Yeah.
And so we're going to need more of the trades than we ever had before.
Yeah. Yeah. And housing for that. I'll never forget, I had a project in Laramie, Wyoming. Of course, you've got the university there, but you've also got Wyotech. This was a massive property. I mean, not massive, but it was the old Dinnerstein property. And I will never forget, it was a management contract. And the first time I went to the property and walking some of the units, these kids the Wyotech kids were taking apart car engines on their kitchen table and all this. And, it was like a perfect opportunity. Of course, Mark Harries was part of that. And you know what kind of gearhead he was. And he immediately went into, there's a piece of land that had what happens to the garbage dumpsters over a period of time. It just turns into a mess and needs to be redone. He's like, we can, end up designing something that, would have the containers on one side, and then we could have like a 2 or 3 bay garage for these guys to work in. And it just, I feel like there's opportunities like that in so many of these tertiary markets that, and this country is needing more of that.
Colleges are going to need to be more creative in terms of thinking about who they're serving and how broad their curriculum is.
Yeah.
Again, the Power 5 or the Power 4 now. I guess there's still technically 2 schools left in the Pac-12, but the Power 4 and the Carnegie R1, I don't see any risk to their model whatsoever. And your state, you take a school like a Texas State that's not currently Power 5, 45,000 students. I mean, so but there will be winners and losers. There's 4,000 institutions of higher education in America, and so I mean, certainly there's going to have to be some level. I think the small privates are going to struggle also.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we do have to be, prudent in terms of where we deploy capital and what type of structure fits which institutions. But
yeah. So what are you most excited about for the next 5 years?
It's I love the business. And again, first and foremost, we're operators. And so rebuilding, at one point as we were rebuilding Maslow, it's like, are you really going to rebuild the operating platform again? Well, why don't you hire a third-party manager? There's good companies out there. It's like, you've got to control the resident experience.
Yeah.
To me, the product we offer, the sticks and the bricks are part of it.
Yeah.
But the real product we offer, again, is the intangible. It's creating those communities that are conducive to academic success. And so the operational side of the business has to impact how you program, how you design, how you deliver, and certainly the day-to-day experience for students and for parents.
Yeah.
And again, as we were talking about hotels, I just feel like as a CEO of a company, I think the key to long-term value creation is that your customers, no matter what they're paying, whether they're paying $499 a month or $2,000 a month, that when they write that check every month, they feel like they're winning the value proposition.
Yeah.
They feel like, man, I feel like I'm getting good value.
Yeah.
I think that so many industries in America today, and I think you mentioned COVID, really lowered consumer expectations, and we tolerated a lot. And so one of the things we want to differentiate, and we want the Maslow's brand to speak to what Maslow's hierarchy is, that it brings out the best and that allows everyone to evolve the best that they can be. And so the culture and the environment in which you live and you learn, nothing is more paramount to that.
Yeah.
And so I look forward to, every stakeholder involved in a transaction, from the teams you put together to design and develop properties, the teams you put together internally to operate the properties and serve. And when you have university partners in the P3, at the end of the day, creating win-wins for everybody and everyone feeling as though they're doing work beyond delivering real estate. To me, COVID, I look back on COVID and I'll tell you, it was anyone can be a good partner when things are going well.
Yeah.
A good partner reveals themselves when what's hitting the fan.
Yeah.
And so, I think throughout COVID, it really caused everybody to reexamine, How do you approach business? How do you approach life? Are you going to be able to do the right thing when it's hard to do the right thing?
Yeah.
And so I think that taught all of us a lot about our businesses and fear of failure and those type of things. And so I look forward to, we're excited to be back in the game. We may not be the biggest company in the space, but certainly aspire to be the best brand in the space in the eyes of students and parents and universities.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing this next chapter. And of course, we're in town for Interface. This podcast is not going to come out before tomorrow. So, but I did see that you're, I think you're speaking at one in LA that's actually both a workforce and a...
Both student housing and workforce. P3 conference out in Los Angeles.
Right.
And again, the P3 delivery model, colleges and universities, it's really matured in terms of universities realizing they don't have as much core competency to deliver student housing as efficiently as the private sector can. And so if you really want the best products at the lowest affordable rates to students, which they do, P3s have really become the standard form of delivery. Even if a university wants to use their own money and balance sheet, we can do it better, faster, and smarter than they can themselves.
Yeah.
And so they've realized that. And I think municipalities across America and corporations, no one has solved the problem of workforce housing because you haven't. When you look at what we've done in student housing over the last 30 years, the on-campus P3s have provided affordable housing. And we've come up with creative financing alternatives. We've come together in how public institutions partner with the private and all of the levers that you pull. Municipalities have to become part of the solution versus just having entitlement processes and fees that are completely contra to creating affordability. Also, the government programs, anytime the government's involved, it's bureaucratic and it's inefficient. Mm-hmm. Candidly, part of the secret sauce in solving the workforce housing issue, and I give you a little teaser here to how Maslow is. I don't believe it is a real estate investment at all. Okay. It's never going to be solved by real estate investment because real estate investment requires too much rental rate growth and too much IRR to ever maintain affordability for the long term.
Sure.
And so I think transaction structure and financing mechanism aren't going to come from the traditional sources that have been building housing. And to me, that's part of the big revolution that needs to take place in some of the creative stuff that we're working on at Maslow's. The inurement of the equity in those communities can inure to a private entity. It's got to inure to the community, to the residents. And so there's a vision there. Obviously, we're really focused on student housing in our launch. But as we grow and as our platform scales, we'll be looking at the opportunities in workforce to really try to solve the problem in a different way than anyone else has.
It's a perfect topic for being in LA and California, and excited to. I'm not sure if I'm going to be out there having some discussions right now, but if folks want to get in touch with you that may be going to the conference, what's the best way for them to
hit the Maslow's Campus Communities website and click on info at Maslow CC and send us a note and we'll get in touch with you.
Well, fantastic. Bill, thanks so much. This is long overdue. And
way overdue.
I have really, really appreciated it. I've got 1,000 other questions that I'll just have to.
Well, we'll have to do it again. And thank you for what you have done for this space and all the information and perspective that you get out there, especially for the field and operational folks. They're the backbone of the industry.
Absolutely.
And I think you create a great forum for them in terms of best practices and inspirational stories and things that keep them going. And as you said about your own career, once you do student, it's hard to do anything else. It gets in your blood. Nothing else is really satisfying.
Exactly.
Thanks
so much.
Pleasure.
Again, a big thanks to Bill for his time, for doing this interview, and really, even a bigger thank you to him for what he's what he's done for this industry. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. And really appreciate the time that he gave me in Austin. I was down there for Interface. I came in a day early, and because we had a lot of things that were scheduled for the first morning, and Him and I have been going back for, over a year on trying to get in front of a microphone to talk about what he's doing with MCC, and I'm just incredibly excited about what we're going to hear about coming from that. But again, big thanks, Bill, for everything that you've done for this industry, and look forward to seeing you at the next conference. So that does it for this episode. I think we've put enough into it. I want to say again, if this is your first time interacting with Student Housing Insight, please go check us out at our website. Again, those links are in the show notes. And don't forget to register for our monthly webinar called ShopTalk. If I didn't mention it earlier, SHOP stands for Student Housing Operations. So it's really for the folks, that regardless if you work for a management firm, if you're on, maybe the equity side, but you're, an asset manager and you're really, familiar with the operations, or if you're, if you're a vendor or a service provider to the space, this is really for all of those people involved with the operations of student housing. So please go check that out at the website is shoptalk.info. You can also get to it through our main website, studenthousinginsight.com. Well, last but not least, if you got any value out of this podcast, I just ask that you please share it with your colleagues. That's the that's the one thing that means the world to us. It brings more people to the platform, more people to share ideas, and that's what we're all about here. So we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everyone.